The year is 1870. In our alternate history, the Confederate States of America stand as a recognized, independent nation. In Part 1, we watched as bold Confederate offensives, foreign intervention from Britain and France, and a decisive Southern victory at Gettysburg forced the United States to the negotiating table. The Treaty of Richmond ended the war, preserved slavery in the South, and carved a permanent border along the Mason-Dixon line. But peace is fragile, and the continent stands on the brink of a new and even deadlier conflict. Now, the uneasy truce begins to unravel. The first cracks appear in the Western territories. Under the Treaty of Richmond, the Confederacy claimed Texas and all lands east of the Rio Grande, while the United States retained Kansas, Nebraska, and California. But the gold-rich Colorado Territory becomes a flashpoint. Southern settlers, many financed by Confederate land companies, pour into the Arkansas River Valley, establishing towns under Confederate jurisdiction. Union officials in Denver protest, and by late 1870, both nations dispatch militia units to patrol the contested frontier. Skirmishes erupt near Pueblo, leaving dozens dead. Meanwhile, in Mexico, France maintains its puppet emperor, Maximilian I, propped up by French troops and now backed by Confederate trade. The United States, still bitter over its defeat, begins covertly supplying arms to Mexican Republicans under Benito Juarez. Confederate intelligence discovers this, and Jefferson Davis, now in his second term as Confederate president, orders the creation of a Western Defense Zone along the Texas-Mexico border, fortifying it with artillery emplacements and new ironclad riverboats on the Rio Grande. Militarily, both sides enter an arms race. The Confederate Army, having learned the lessons of the last war, invests heavily in rail transport, standardized rifled artillery, and British-designed breech-loading rifles. The United States, under President George B. McClellan, expands its navy, commissioning a new generation of ironclads and ocean-going monitors. Both nations experiment with the Gatling gun, and by 1872, each possesses hundreds in active service. But the most dangerous front is not in the west or on the high seas, it is along the Mason-Dixon line itself. Ohio River towns become armed camps. In Pittsburgh, Union factories work day and night forging steel rails, artillery pieces, and warships. Across the river in Wheeling, Confederate foundries match them gun for gun. Rail networks hum with the movement of troops disguised as training exercises. The air is thick with rumors. In 1873, the St. Louis incident nearly brings full-scale war. A Union gunboat, patrolling the Mississippi near the agreed border, collides with a Confederate steamer carrying cotton to New Orleans. Shots are exchanged. The steamer sinks with over 60 civilian deaths. Both governments accuse the other of aggression. McClellan mobilizes 60,000 troops in Missouri, while the Confederacy moves an equal number into Arkansas. For weeks, the world braces for a second civil war. Only frantic diplomacy from Britain prevents immediate conflict, but the mistrust is now irreversible. Internationally, the Confederacy thrives economically, exporting cotton, tobacco, and sugar to Europe in exchange for manufactured goods. Yet this prosperity masks deep tensions. Britain and France, both officially allied with Richmond, face mounting public pressure to push for gradual emancipation in the South. Confederate leaders resist, fearing the collapse of their plantation economy. Abolitionist groups in the North funnel money and arms to underground networks that smuggle enslaved people across the Ohio River into Union territory. Confederate newspapers denounce these networks as Northern espionage, fueling calls for military retaliation. By the mid-1870s, the North begins to recover economically and industrially from its earlier defeat. The completion of the Transcontinental Railroad in 1874 allows the United States to project power into the Pacific and secure lucrative trade with Asia. Confederate leaders see this as a direct threat to their long-term influence and begin planning their own western rail link from Texas to California, territory they do not yet control. In 1876, on the centennial of American independence, tensions explode again, this time in Kansas. Confederate settlers, supported by armed escorts, attempt to establish homesteads south of the Arkansas River in what the treaty left to the Union. Union cavalry under Colonel Ranald Mackenzie moves to evict them, sparking the three-day Battle of Dodge City. Nearly 400 are killed before a temporary ceasefire is declared, but the damage is done. Both sides now openly speak of the inevitable Second War. The following year, Jefferson Davis dies in office. His successor, General Robert E. Lee, is elected President of the Confederacy in a landslide, campaigning on the promise of peace through strength. In the North, President McClellan's term ends, and his successor, President James G. Blaine, takes a harder line toward Richmond. Both leaders quietly begin stockpiling war material at unprecedented rates. Naval expansion becomes the next arena of competition. The United States establishes a modern fleet of armored cruisers and fast torpedo boats, while the Confederacy, aided by British shipyards, launches the massive CSS Britannia, a steel-hulled battleship armed with 12-inch rifles, one of the most powerful warships in the world. These fleets shadow each other in the Atlantic and the Gulf, each waiting for the first shot to be fired. Then, in the winter of 1878, the border finally erupts. In Cincinnati, a Confederate agent is arrested carrying maps of Union fortifications and lists of artillery positions along the Ohio. Under interrogation, he confesses to being part of an organized espionage ring operating out of Louisville. Days later, a Confederate gunboat exchanges fire with a Union ironclad near Paducah, Kentucky. The next morning, President Blaine delivers a fiery address to Congress, declaring that the Republic will no longer be held hostage by the tyranny of Richmond. Congress authorizes the mobilization of 200,000 troops. Lee responds with his own address to the Confederate Congress in Richmond, declaring that the South will meet the aggressor with the same resolve that secured our independence 15 years ago. The Confederate Army begins full mobilization. Across the continent, rail lines groan under the movement of men and machines. Cities from St. Louis to Philadelphia prepare for siege. The Second American War has begun. But this war will not be fought as the last one was. Both sides now possess industrialized killing machines, steel warships, rapid-fire artillery, and deadly new repeating rifles. The casualty rates will dwarf those of the 1860s. And as the first snow falls along the Mason-Dixon line in December 1878, two massive armies stare at each other across a frozen river, knowing that when the thaw comes in spring, history itself will be rewritten once more. History is full of battles, but the greatest one is keeping their stories alive. Subscribe now and never miss the moments that changed the world. To be continued in Part 3.